element is water. And maybe this is why they were named Red Moon, White Moon. I'm not sure, but I just feel like I am such an emotional wreck. I am in my wise woman phase, and I just feel the depths of emotions. It feels like I am going through an emotional storm. For the past 3 days, I knew that my recording date was coming up. I was not interested in the least, if I'm going to be honest, to record. I started having more feelings of doubt surrounding the podcast. And if I'm supposed to be doing this, you guys have heard me talk about this a few times, several times, most especially in the beginning. And I want to be honest with you. I'm not looking for any validation from any of the listeners on why the podcast should continue. That's not why I want to share this information. I share these feelings because I want you to know the truth about working on a project, working on a creative baby. Sometimes people might look at a project when it's thriving, but what we don't get to see is the hard work, the dedication, the tears that come with executing these types of project babies, these creative babies. And I am full of those doubts, and I just want you to know that I am full of those doubts. Part of it is because I am taking much deeper steps into my spiritual growth, and I entered a new level of what I want to call spirituality for me personally on my growth level. I have another teacher that appeared, and what I am learning is that I absolutely know nothing at all. And there's a part of me that feels like, who am I to talk about this subject? And like I said, I'm not sharing this information to seek validation from any of our listeners, from any of our tribe. I'm just sharing it because I think it's important to also note the struggles and the fear that occur when we are raising our creative babies. I feel so much better now that that is off my chest. I talked to Alfonso last night and I told him that I didn't want to continue, and he let me process my feelings. I think he knew that trying to convince me of something in that moment wasn't the answer, to just let these feelings move through me. I woke up in the middle of the night and I remembered that I had not emptied out my menstrual cup before going to bed. In that moment, I was triggered by a memory that I had that took place when I was in college. I was living on campus and I was having violent pains in my stomach. The pains became so violent that I had to go to the emergency room. When I went into the emergency room, the doctors told me that what happened was that my period reversed itself, which meant that my blood was no longer coming out, it was going up into my uterus. I had completely forgotten about that experience, completely. And I don't even think I investigated why it happens. Maybe I did, maybe I forgot. I can't remember. I jumped out of bed and I went to go empty out my cup. And I thought to myself, that must have happened because perhaps my tampon had overflowed or something to that effect. And when I woke up this morning, I kept thinking about the podcast and I thought, I'm not going to record. I'm just not going to record today. Tomorrow's another day. And if I feel better about this tomorrow, then I'll record an episode tomorrow. And as I was moving through my morning, something was calling me to sit down and start my research on today's episode. The irony about all of this is that I've had this episode planned out for a couple of weeks. I wanted to talk about the dangers of tampons and pads, and I wanted to also talk a little bit about the alternatives that we have. The irony is that I had the trigger that happened in the middle of the night. As I sat down to go ahead and move forward and do the research that my heart was pulling me towards, I started to find a lot of information. Some of the information tied to the experience that I had when I went to the hospital back in college. It's really incredible how God continues to light our paths and give us hints and clues of the direction we're supposed to head in. I'm not an expert, by no means, in any of the topics that I discuss. Everything I talk about is based on experience or research that I've done. I share it because no one has shared this information with me. And most of the time that I share things, I hear from our listeners that they never knew about this information as well. This is a public service announcement. The podcast itself is a public service announcement. And I do feel some sort of responsibility. And it's okay that I'm not an expert. I'm just sharing. I invite you to do your own research when looking into the information that I've shared today. Everything that I will be referencing will be shared from links where I pulled this information in our show notes. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to dive into what I believe is one of the most important episodes from Let There Be Loose. The first piece of information that I want to share is that our vagina is made up of fatty tissues. Fat stores chemicals and is highly absorbent. Take note, this part of our body is the part of our body that is most vulnerable because it is a tissue that is extremely fatty, that the vulnerable part of the tissue absorbs anything that it comes in contact with. The first thing I want to discuss are the dangers of using tampons and pads. I found an eye-opening blog post by a woman named Alicia Smith, who interviews a doctor that is an expert in the dangers of tampons. And I want to share not only some of the discoveries that she made, but I cross-referenced a lot of what the doctor shared with other articles that I'm also going to add in our show notes. As I was reading this information, point after point, I was shocked because I find it really hard to believe that this type of information isn't shared more often. How come we don't know about these things? Or maybe I should just speak for myself. How come I didn't know about these things? So let's just get into it. When we think of tampons, and the most common problem with tampons is toxic shock syndrome. We know that that's why it's dangerous. Maybe we're also familiar with the dangers of it because the tampons are bleached. So let's start off with some of the basics. Tampons have a toxin called dioxin. According to Google Dictionary, this is the definition of dioxin. A highly toxic compound produced as a byproduct in some manufacturing processes, notably herbicide production and paper bleaching. It is a serious and persistent environmental pollutant. So I'm just going to read parts of this again. It is a highly toxic compound. It is a serious and persistent environmental pollutant. It pollutes our environment. Can you stop to think about what it does to our vagina? One of the most vulnerable tissues on our body that has high fat and easily absorbs anything it comes in contact with. When reading about dioxin levels in tampons, I've come across statements that kind of brush off the fact that they still use dioxin in tampons. And they're statements that sort of say it's a minimal amount, nothing to really be worried about. Alicia, in her interview, asks the doctor an extremely important question. She says, "Does anyone know what tampons are made of besides the manufacturer?" And the doctor responds, "No." Let me tell you why we don't know what tampons are made of. We may know some of the toxins or some of the ingredients that it has, but we really don't know what it is made of. That is because the FDA says it's proprietary information, and that information can't be released. Why? Because someone else might copy it and reproduce the product. Therefore, there's no way for us to really know what tampons are made of. I mean, I don't know about you, but I needed to take a moment after reading that. For some reason, I was under the stupid impression that I could research everything that tampons are made out of. I thought that legally, they had to tell us what was in a tampon. I assumed, which is the worst thing you can do when you're using these types of products, is that someone on some level was protecting me. That maybe those statements of it's not a lot of dioxin, was something I could really take to heart and also brush off. But that's not the case. We're not being protected. Alicia goes on to ask the doctor if any independent tests have been done on the overall safety of the tampons. And the doctor says no. Why? There has been no money raised for scientists to research this information. So we have been using tampons since 1933, and there has been not one study to show what is in these products. Isn't that mind-blowing? Alicia questions, is it because this is a billion-dollar industry? And the doctor responds that it is a trillion-dollar industry. And that pretty much answers the question on why research hasn't been done. The dioxins that our vagina absorbs through these tampons actually go through our liver to be filtered out. But even though it goes through the liver to detox, they are still able to find traces of dioxin in our body. And apparently these traces compound, so it accumulates and it can be measured over 20 to 30 years. So the longer you wear a tampon, not only is this more exposure to dioxin, but you're accumulating the toxin in your body. And we have to be really careful because even tampons that claim to be 100% cotton, they still found traces of dioxin in the tampon because dioxin is a pesticide that they use to treat cotton. So you have to make sure that you are using organic cotton tampons if you are going to still continue that route. But let's just get into this even further because you may not want to use tampons at all. Alicia goes on to pose a very important question. Do you believe tampons can cause endometriosis? For those that don't know what endometriosis is, let me just explain really quickly what it is. This definition of endometriosis was retrieved from the obgyn.ucla website. Endometriosis is when the tissue that makes up the uterine lining, the lining of the womb, is present on other organs inside your body. Endometriosis is usually found in the lower abdomen or pelvis, but it can appear anywhere in the body. Women with endometriosis often have lower abdominal pain, pain with periods, or pain with sexual intercourse, and may report having a hard time getting pregnant. On the other hand, some women who have endometriosis may not have a symptom at all. When I first started the Moon Cycle series, I had so many women write in to tell me about their endometriosis experience. I had never heard of endometriosis before. We had our first listener write in, and then our second listener and our third and our fourth. And by the time I knew it, endometriosis was such a common conversation from our listeners. The stories that come in from the effects of endometriosis are really sad. For the most part, the common experience throughout all of the women that write in is that it is something that definitely rules their experience. They are strong women and they are working through it, and it's amazing to hear what the Moon Cycle series has done for them in terms of experiencing their bleeds through a different perspective and maybe make peace with it overall. But it does tend to affect not only their relationship with their partners, but the most important relationship that we have, and that's the one with ourselves, because they are living with so much pain and angst. When I read this next question from Alicia to the doctor, the question and the answer both took me by surprise. She asks, "Do you believe tampons cause endometriosis?" The doctor responds, "Dioxin is a known cause for endometriosis. When I pull up endometriosis, nowhere do I immediately see links between endometriosis and dioxin. This information is not made obvious. It really upsets me that endometriosis could possibly be self-induced because of the lack of information that is being distributed when it comes to these types of products." Aside from the potential causes of endometriosis being the dioxin one, and of course the change in hormones another, there's a theory that the tissue that we are supposed to be expelling from our uterus is actually storing inside our uterus, because tampons are only meant to absorb fluid. They're not meant to absorb tissue. So the tissue, as well as the fluid, if the tampon is too full, can go back up and into our fallopian tubes. Remember when I went to the hospital and the doctors told me that my flow had reversed itself? Well, the tissues could potentially exit out of the fallopian tubes and then move throughout our bodies and cause major problems. Alicia actually goes in to discuss this theory and asks the doctor if the tampons can cause the tissue to be pushed up. And the doctor responds that yes, indeed, the tampon can back up the fluid. It's important to note that the fluid can be pushed up naturally through other circumstances. But this doesn't disregard that a tampon can also be a factor. And it makes much more sense to me that okay, fine, this can occur naturally, but if we are essentially putting plugs into our vagina, then it almost feels like common sense on why we are getting backed up, why we have so many women that are suffering from endometriosis. Something else that is extremely important to note is that a tampon is only supposed to be worn for a maximum of 6 hours. This means that if you wear a tampon while you sleep, and I want to say that for the most part, I think it's safe to say that most of us sleep for more than 6 hours, then you are potentially in danger of backing up your flow. So it is important that if you are going to continue to wear tampons, at the very least, please try not to wear them while you sleep, most especially if you're sleeping for more than 6 hours. Alicia goes on to ask if dioxins can grow cysts or be the cause of cysts growing in our bodies. The doctor confirms that dioxins can give a rise to tumors growing in our bodies. This is so interesting to me because I have a few fibroids, and when I ask my doctor what is the cause of this, my doctor responds that they are not entirely sure. That response kind of made me feel like perhaps they've looked for an answer but haven't found one. But now that I know that studies have not been performed completely on tampons and their safety, tell me that anything that goes into this area of the body probably hasn't been researched enough. Alicia's last question, that is one of the most important questions that is extremely eye-opening, is what are the dangers of the fibers that get left behind once you remove the tampon? So for those that don't know, when you pull your tampon out, there is a high chance that the fibers from the tampon are actually staying inside your vagina. And what is happening when that takes place is that not only can it cause infection and it can cause odor, but it also can cause inflammation. This is the most important part of this entire message, and that is that chronic inflammation can lead to infertility. I really need to take some time to process all of this information that I'm learning today. And it's not just processing the information. I think for me, what is more shocking is that I'm 38 years old and this is the first time I hear of any of this. Now I want to get into the pad conversation because pads are also made from the same material that tampons are made from. Yes, I can see how wearing a pad is much better than wearing a tampon because you are able to let go of the tissues that you're releasing. It's not just the liquid, so I think that is so much better. But it's really important to not discount the fact that dioxin is still in a pad and that there's all kinds of chemicals and that we still don't know what these things are made of. Not only that, but most of the people that are making the pads are also making these tampons. And you have to know that there's proof in that their best interest is at heart, not our best interest. The intent for this episode is not necessarily to make us sad or depressed or angry, even though I did go through all of those feelings when I was finding this research, but more so to empower ourselves and to research and find out what it is that we are putting into our bodies. I think it's really time for us to stop allowing for big manufacturers to make decisions for us. And it's time to empower ourselves. And I hate to say it this way, but not make ourselves the victim of certain circumstances of what products are marketed heavily towards us, to research and investigate what is behind these products, most especially if our intuition is telling us to stop using these types of products. We're going to take a short break, and when we get back, we're going to talk about some amazing alternatives.
Return to the one. Return to the one.
I've talked about this before on the podcast. Shortly after I had my son, I became extremely in tune with my body. I was getting clear messages of things that I should and should not be ingesting. And one of those clear messages was to stop using tampons. I paid attention and I switched over to pads. 6 months into that, I started using the cup. I do have an episode on the alternative of the cup and Thinx panties. I think it's a really great episode. I'm not going to go into any of the details really of the cup and the pros and the cons because I already did a ton of research on that. So I'm going to invite you to head over to the episode that is in the show notes so that you can get all of the information, what my experience was like when I first used it, my thoughts. I go into every single gory detail. I love the cup. What I do want to say about it today is that I really wasn't aware that tampons were not able to ingest tissue. I guess I knew that. And I know that we have clots that come out of us. I guess I just never thought about it. And that is why my biggest push today is going to be for you to use a cup as an alternative to a tampon. If that is the type of protection, I guess I can say, that you're looking for, if you're active, if you just prefer to use a tampon, then I would highly, highly recommend for you to make a switch over to the cup. Because a cup can sustain tissue, obviously, as well as the fluid. So that is great news. And it also can sustain a lot. I have one heavy day throughout my cycle, and on that heavy day, the cup is almost full, not quite full, but it is almost full. It's also supposed to be safe. The silicone is supposed to be safe. Again, I have all of this information on the other episode that I did in regards to the cup. What I do want to say about this being safer is that I really, at this point, don't know if there have been any studies to show that, okay? So I don't know if we've done extensive research on whether it is safe to insert a silicone cup. What I can say is that I do think it's a much better alternative than using a tampon. Even if it is 100% organic tampon, we have to remember that we are shedding tissue and that a tampon cannot support that. Also, my breasts are silicone, so there's that. Another glorious point that I want to talk about in reference to the cup is that we only have to change it every 12 hours, like in the morning and before going to bed. I mean, to me, initially that was like, what? This is a done deal. I don't have to worry about this. I don't have to deal with it, you know? And despite all of these preconceived notions that I had before transitioning into the cup and how gross it was going to be and all of these negative thoughts, it was actually one of the most spiritual experiences that I could have with myself. And it still continues to be that way. And that is why I am so excited for the next product that I want to talk about, which is Glad Rags. It is a cotton pad. Glad Rags sent over some day pads and some panty liners for me to try out. And I have to be completely honest that I don't really think that I even knew that this existed at all. I was doing some research and I found the company. They sent product over. I tried it last month during my bleed and I tried it for the tail end. And this is the first time that I'm using it from beginning to end. Before we go any further, I do want to let you know that I did not get paid to do this review. I'm not getting paid to talk about this product. As I mentioned, they did send the product over for free, and we are also partnering up for a giveaway so that a lucky winner can try the product. But I'm so excited for it because I did have a great experience. So they sent over panty liners as well as day pads. I really love that it comes in fun colors. It's just something that's fun to look at, I feel like, if that makes any sense. The panty liners are a bit shorter, and they do come with wings that snap around your underwear so that they can stay in place. And the day pads are really interesting. They are longer and they come with like an insert. It also snaps around your underwear, but it comes with an insert, and in that insert, you actually insert the pads. I know this is kind of confusing. We are going to link their website so that you can check out their product online so that you can see what I am trying to communicate. I want to walk you through my experience of using the Glad Rags. It's a big change in the way you look at your cycle, the way you look at your bleed, but I think again, it is so grounding, so powerful, and it brings you closer to your true essence. I really loved the feeling of the pad and the way it felt against my vagina. It felt really luxurious. The biggest difference that I felt between this and a pad is that a pad really feels like a diaper, and it almost cheapens the experience of going through your bleed, going through your cycle, where with the Glad Rag, the cloth rag, it really felt like a luxurious experience. It felt kind of like, you know, the difference between like wearing a robe and going to the doctor's office and wearing that paper robe. It didn't feel like something that I was trying to bandage with cold energy that felt sterile like a hospital almost. It feels more of like something that I was nurturing and celebrating with a spa experience. That's the only way I can really articulate what the experience is like with pads versus cloth pads. You do obviously have to wash them. I do wash mine by hand and then I place them into the wash. I personally don't find this experience disgusting, and it's probably because I've had a solid year of transitioning away from disposable products that I'm gradually stepping into this new space that I really truly appreciate. So I just want to say, be patient with yourself, but also be explorative. I know that changes like these can kind of freak us out, and we have all of these preconceived notions of what this experience is supposed to be like. Some of us are still in a space where we think this shouldn't even be taking place. So I just want to invite you to be expansive when it comes to this. I read somewhere that over the course of our lifetime, we will use around 7,000 pads or tampons. So I'd like to invite you to think of the money that you'll save when you switch over to items that are reusable. I would definitely like to invite you to do the math on how much you spend on pads and tampons for the entire year versus the investment that it's going to take to get you set up with Glad Rags or with a Diva cup. You'll see once you do the math that this is a really great investment, and your Yoni will thank you for it for sure. So as I mentioned, we are going to be doing a giveaway with Glad Rags. We're so excited to be able to share this. We will be putting up a post on our Instagram page on Friday, so be on the lookout for that. The instructions are going to be really simple. I just ask that you be sure to be following the Let There Be Lose Instagram, follow the Glad Rags Instagram, and comment in the comment section that you would like to enter to win. And if you use Glad Rags already, or if you use any type of cloth pad, please let us know why you love using it in the comment section. I definitely want to hear from you all. For this week's Yoni work, I would just simply like to invite you to evaluate what types of products you're using and perhaps consider transitioning to a much more natural alternative. I would also like to invite you to please share this information. I wanted to just send gratitude and love to Alicia P. Smith, who interviewed the doctor that was an expert on tampons. I found a lot of information that I'm referencing, but by far this was the best article that I read. I just want to send her so much love and gratitude for sharing this information. I have no idea who she is. I would like to invite you to share her interview that she did with the doctor via the blog post, or simply share this episode. My honest intent is that we just raise awareness surrounding these types of topics. It's so important. And as we already have learned, the yoni is the most precious part of our body, for it is where not only life is birthed, but it is also where creative babies are birthed. So it's a special sacred space that we need to learn to take care of and just inquire. Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode. If you like the content that I'm producing, I just want to ask for you to take a few minutes and head over to iTunes, rate us, and review us. I really appreciate everyone's love and support, and this is one of the best ways that you could support the podcast, is to simply rate and review us so that we can get more exposure. I love you guys so much. May the light within get stronger.
Return to the one.